the calm before the storm. Julian Carter didn't need much to be happy. His days started with black coffee on the screened-in porch, watching the mist peel away from the surface of Mirror Lake. The world was quiet here, except for the soft lap of water against the dock and the hum of cicadas rising with the sun. After years in bustling Atlanta working as an aerospace engineer, Julian had traded rush-hour traffic and corporate deadlines for birdsong and boat oil. Peace, in his book, had always looked a lot like this. The house wasn't big. White siding, black shutters, a rusting wind chime by the door. But it sat on a prime plot, a sloping lawn that ran right up to the water's edge. The lake shimmered like a mirror, hence the name, stretching out like a sheet of glass wrapped in pine and cottonwood. His grandfather, Walter Carter, had bought the land and the lake outright in 1954, an unthinkable move for a black man at the time. Julian could still hear his voice. Own something no one can take. Dirt. Water. Your name. The rest of the neighborhood hadn't looked like this when Julian was a boy. Back then, the nearby town of Clearfield was mostly working class and black. Families barbecued along the lakeshore and children chased fireflies while adults played dominoes under the stars. Mirror Lake was their secret gem. But things changed. Developers came, one by one, offering cash and promises. New money brought manicured lawns, decorative mailboxes, and eventually rules. Now, most homes around the lake belonged to white retirees or middle-aged professionals who'd traded city condos for country charm. The HOA called the neighborhood Lakewood Preserve. Julian found the name ironic. Nothing about this place was preserved except appearances. Still, he tried not to make waves. His grandfather's house needed repairs, and fixing it became Julian's new purpose. He restored the dock, replanted native shrubs, and most importantly, refurbished his grandfather's old wooden boat. It had been sitting under a tarp in the shed, its mahogany hull dry and cracked, but the bones were good. Every morning, Julian worked on it like a ritual. Sanding, sealing, remembering. Most of the neighbors were polite enough. Mrs. Garland waved from her porch. The Sanders twins offered to help with yard work, though their parents rarely made eye contact. Julian didn't mind. Solitude suited him. But every now and then, something small would shift in the air. Something subtle, like a breeze before a storm. It started with the newsletter. One afternoon, tucked inside his mailbox, Julian found the Lakewood Preserve HOA Monthly. In bold letters at the top, maintaining community standards, a shared responsibility. The main article detailed unauthorized structures and vessels on community access waterfronts. It didn't name names, but it might as well have. The only unauthorized vessel was Julian's boat. He read it twice, then folded it calmly and tossed it into the recycling. Harmless, he told himself. Probably just overzealous volunteers with nothing better to do. But a week later, while sanding the hull, a middle-aged man in salmon-colored shorts wandered up his driveway. "Morning," the man called. "Nice setup you've got here." "You knew." Julian set his tools down. "Moved back about 6 months ago. Grew up here, actually." The man blinked. "Oh. Didn't realize anyone well. Welcome back, I guess." He introduced himself as Craig Gibbons, HOA Vice President. The kind of man who smiled too wide and squinted too hard. His voice had the cadence of someone used to being agreed with. "Just wanted to say, we love having homeowners who care about appearances. Keeps the property values strong, you know?" Julian raised an eyebrow. "Appreciate the sentiment." Craig gestured toward the boat. "That beauty yours?" "Was my grandfather's. Restoring it." Craig nodded, lips tight. "I see. Well, it's just that the HOA has guidelines about lakefront visibility. We like to keep things cohesive, no eyesores or vintage projects left out too long." Julian felt something cool settle in his chest. The boat wasn't visible from the road. Only neighbors walking by would notice it. And even then, eyesore was a stretch. "I'm on my own property," Julian said evenly. "And so's the boat." Craig chuckled, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Just figured I'd give a friendly heads up before someone files a complaint. Things tend to escalate if not handled early." Julian didn't answer. Craig took the silence as dismissal and walked back toward the road, waving once over his shoulder. That night, Julian sat on the dock, feet dangling over the water. Fireflies blinked in the cattails. Somewhere across the lake, laughter echoed, someone's cocktail party spilling into twilight. He closed his eyes and listened to the water. His grandfather's voice came again, low and certain. "If you ever come back, boy, don't let him talk you off your own land. Not even with a smile." Lines in the water. A week after Craig's visit, Julian received the letter. It came in a crisp white envelope, embossed with the Lakewood Preserve HOA logo, a stylized heron perched on a branch. The kind of branding that screamed serenity, while quietly enforcing conformity. Inside, the message was short and sharp. "Dear homeowner, this notice serves as a formal request to remove the non-regulation vessel currently visible from shared community spaces. As per HOA aesthetic guidelines, all waterfront properties must maintain uniform visual standards. Failure to comply within 10 days will result in a daily fine of $75. Sincerely, HOA Compliance Committee." Julian read it once, then again, slower. Non-regulation vessel? The boat hadn't even touched the water yet. It sat on his own dock, beside his own shed, on land his grandfather had owned since Eisenhower was president. He shook his head, a faint laugh escaping his throat, not bitter, just tired. That night, he pulled out the old lockbox from under the bed. It was scratched and dusty, secured with a brass latch that had long forgotten its original shine. Inside were documents his grandfather had saved for decades: land deeds, property maps, newspaper clippings, yellowed photographs of a younger Walter Carter holding up catfish the size of his forearm. Julian unfolded the official deed from 1954. It was clear. Walter Carter had purchased not just the house, but the entire lake, a quiet loophole he'd exploited when the original white landowners wanted a quick sale and assumed no black man could afford the full price. The land and the water that fed it had never left the Carter name. Still, Julian made photocopies of the paperwork the next morning, scanned the documents to his computer, and composed a polite but firm email to the HOA's general inbox. Subject line: regarding Mirror Lake property rights. In the message, he included a digital copy of the deed and highlighted the section that read, quite unambiguously, "All bodies of water herein referred to, including Mirror Lake and its adjacent shoreline, are the property of Walter L. Carter and his descendants." He hit send and waited. 3 days later, the fishing club arrived. They showed up like they always did, every other Saturday at dawn. Pickup trucks lined the road near the western side of the lake. Coolers thumped onto grass. Expensive rods cast long arcs into the morning mist. They called themselves the Lakewood Anglers, an unofficial HOA-affiliated fishing group. Julian had seen them before, though they never waved, never asked, never spoke. Some of them were the same men who had nodded stiffly when he passed by in the grocery store or gave half-smiles while watering their lawns. They wore camo and polos. They used words like sportsmanship and tradition. What they didn't use, apparently, was permission. Julian stood on his porch that morning, arms crossed. He watched them fish from the opposite dock, drink beer, blast country music from Bluetooth speakers. He thought about his grandfather, who used to tell stories of being chased off this same lake as a boy for fishing without a license in a place he now owned. He decided to wait. Later that afternoon, while the sun burned gold across the water, Julian took a walk around the lake's edge. The trail that looped the shoreline had once been a deer path, but was now a carefully maintained community nature walk, complete with rustic benches and birding signs. He passed a family walking their golden retriever, a pair of joggers in matching neon tops, and a young boy struggling to keep up on his scooter. All white. All of them looked at him, then quickly looked away. At the far side of the lake, he reached the fishing dock. Most of the men had packed up, but a few lingered, smoking and swearing at their tangled lines. "Excuse me," Julian said, voice even. One of the men turned. Tall, red-faced, with a baseball cap, pulled low. "Yeah, I believe you're on private property," Julian said. "The lake isn't public. It was never turned over to the HOA. I have documentation to that effect. The man scoffed. This dock's part of the community. No, it's not, Julian replied. The land under it, and the water it touches, belong to me. Has since 1954. Another man chimed in. You got a problem with us fishin'? We've been coming out here for years. That doesn't make it legal, Julian said. And starting now, I expect people to ask before using my property. The tall man stepped forward, face tightening. Look, buddy. Julian didn't flinch. It's Julian, not buddy. They stared at each other, the summer heat thick between them. Finally, the man turned away, muttering something under his breath. Julian walked back the way he came, slow and calm. He didn't look back. That evening, he drafted a cease and desist letter. He didn't write it in anger. He wrote it the way his grandfather might have, clear, unshaken, rooted in fact. The HOA had poked the wrong man. What they didn't know, what no one in Lakewood Preserve seemed to bother learning, was that Mirror Lake wasn't just some ornamental pond behind their million-dollar homes. It was his inheritance, and it remembered every name written on its deed. Ripples turned to waves. The response from the HOA came in 2 days later, printed on official letterhead and delivered by hand, tucked inside Julian's storm door like a warning note left on a windshield. Dear Mr. Carter, we have received your claims regarding sole ownership of Mirror Lake. However, as the lake is utilized by the broader Lakewood Preserve community, its use falls under HOA regulation. We believe any exclusive ownership claims are outdated or unenforceable given current easement customs. We request a meeting to clarify expectations moving forward. Sincerely, Lakewood Preserve HOA Compliance Committee. Julian leaned back in his porch chair and exhaled slowly. Outdated? Customs? That was the language of people trying to rewrite the rules mid-game. He didn't reply. Instead, he sent a certified letter, drafted with the help of a real estate attorney, detailing the exact legal ownership of Mirror Lake. It included scans of the original deed, recent surveyor confirmation, and photographs of posted signs that now surrounded the lake perimeter. The message was simple. Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Lake access permitted by owner invitation only. Within a week, the signs started vanishing. 3 of them were yanked from the ground. 1 was tossed in the reeds. Julian replaced each, quietly, methodically, adding cameras near the dock for good measure. His lawyer sent a second letter, this one to the HOA and the fishing club directly, demanding immediate cessation of all lake activity not explicitly approved by the property owner. The neighborhood didn't take it well. First came the whispers, comments muttered on walks, behind hedge trimmers, between SUV door slams. People Julian had never met stared too long, their smiles tightened by resentment. One neighbor walked by with her teenage son and, loud enough for Julian to hear, said, "Some people just don't understand how a community works." Then came the social media posts. In the private Lakewood Preserve Facebook group, which Julian had never joined, a thread exploded. Lake Tyrant. He won't even let the fishing club use it anymore. My husband's been going there every Saturday for years. It's about control, not the lake. Why buy a house on the water if we can't enjoy it like before? One post caught Julian's attention when a neighbor forwarded it to him privately. Funny how he just appeared one day and started laying down the law. Never even tried to integrate. Integrate. The word lingered. Julian didn't argue. He didn't post, didn't comment. He let them speculate while he filed trespassing notices and reinforced the signage. What they viewed as arrogance was simply the quiet defense of legacy. One Saturday, he walked the dock early and found a small boy, no older than 9, casting a line off the end. "Hey there," Julian said gently. The boy flinched, then turned. "Sorry, sir. I didn't know." "Not your fault," Julian said. "Did your parents tell you it was okay to fish here?" The boy nodded. "They said everybody always does." Julian crouched beside him. "It used to be that way. But this lake isn't for everybody. It belongs to someone." "Who?" Julian smiled. "Me." The boy stared. "Oh." He looked at the lake, then back at Julian. "It's really pretty. I like it here." Julian nodded. So did my grandfather. He bought it when people said he wasn't supposed to. And people fished here without asking for a long time. But now it's time they ask. The boy nodded again, quiet. Julian offered to walk him home. That moment stayed with Julian more than any of the angry letters or stiff glares. The boy hadn't acted entitled. Just unaware, conditioned, maybe, by a world that taught him to assume everything within sight was his to use. That was the quietest kind of theft. The kind that happened over generations. That Sunday, Julian wrote a letter to the local paper. Not a rant or a protest, just a personal essay. He titled it, "The Lake Remembers." In it, he told the story of Walter Carter, of a black man who'd purchased 16 acres and a stretch of water in the Jim Crow South, of how that lake became a safe haven when no one else would share, of how ownership wasn't just legal, it was cultural, spiritual, historical, and of how today, in 2025, people still believed that possession was a matter of appearance over inheritance. He ended the piece with a quiet warning. This lake was never given to you. It was never borrowed. It was never shared. It was taken. And now, I am simply taking it back. Within 48 hours, the article went viral in the town and beyond. Black elders in neighboring communities mailed him handwritten letters of thanks. A local high school teacher asked to reprint it for a civics unit. The HOA didn't respond publicly, but suddenly, their tone shifted. Julian received another letter. This one was handwritten from the HOA president herself. "Mr. Carter, I believe we may have started off on the wrong foot. I'd like to invite you to our next board meeting to discuss possible terms of shared lake use." Julian didn't respond. Some things weren't up for negotiation. A lake, remembered. The lake was calm that morning, so still it looked like glass laid over the earth, catching the sky's reflection with perfect clarity. Julian stood at the edge of the dock, one hand resting on the bow of the boat he'd spent months restoring. His grandfather's boat. Its mahogany shell gleamed in the early light, polished and sealed like a sacred heirloom. He slid it into the water slowly, the hull cutting through the surface with reverence. This was the first time it would float in decades. It groaned gently, like it, too, was remembering something long buried. Behind him, the neighborhood remained quiet. Lawn sprinklers hissed. A few car doors thudded closed. Wind stirred through leaves, brushing past the new private property signs now posted in clean intervals around the lake. They hadn't been touched in weeks. Even the HOA seemed to have resigned themselves to the reality they'd tried so hard to ignore. Julian stepped into the boat, took the oars in his hands, and pushed off. For the first time since returning, he let himself drift to the lake's center. A few days earlier, he had attended the HOA meeting. He hadn't planned to. The invitation had come reluctantly, with a tone of polite defeat. But after the article made its rounds, after local activists and journalists started knocking, the HOA found it harder to dismiss Julian's ownership or his story. He walked in wearing a simple collared shirt and slacks. No lawyer, no entourage, just the truth. The room was filled with folded arms and forced smiles. Craig Gibbons was there, seated near the front with a clipboard that looked more like a shield than a tool. The HOA president, a tall woman named Renee Hollis, cleared her throat nervously. "Mr. Carter," she began, "we appreciate your presence and want to acknowledge the importance of the history you've shared. We'd like to open a dialogue about mutually beneficial lake access." Julian let the words settle. Mutually beneficial. Shared access. The same language used by people who were never required to share anything until now. He stood, looked them all in the eyes. Not with anger, but with certainty. "My grandfather bought this lake when no one else would sell to people like him. He paid in full. And for 50 years, no one from this community even acknowledged his name. You fished in his water, hosted parties beside it, named your events after it, without asking once whose lake it was." A few in the room shifted in their seats. "I'm not interested in negotiating legacy," he said. "I'm not interested in making you comfortable with something that was never yours. That time has passed." He paused. "But I am interested in honoring what this lake has meant to my family, to our history, to people who never had a place like this before. He handed them a sheet of paper. It outlined his plan. No HOA fishing club. No community events. The lake was private and would remain so. But once a month, it would be open to local Black families from neighboring towns, people often pushed out of such places by rising prices and silent exclusion. There would be no fees, no permits. Just a space to breathe. The board didn't argue. They just nodded slowly because they finally understood they were not at the helm. Now, Julian rowed to the lake's center and let the boat drift. From here, the shorelines looked equal. You couldn't tell where the million-dollar homes ended and where his grandfather's modest house began. The water didn't care who built what or who wore what logo on their polo shirts. It simply remembered what had been poured into it, years of sweat, love, and silence swallowed by waves. Across the lake, he saw someone standing on their porch. A child, maybe the same boy he'd once spoken to. He raised a hand in slow greeting. The boy waved back. Julian smiled. That afternoon, a letter arrived in his mailbox. Handwritten, folded neatly. It was from an older Black woman named Mrs. Ainsley, who lived 3 streets over. He'd never met her. Mr. Carter, I read your piece in the paper. My father helped dig part of this lake, back when no one paid us, but they called it a favor. We used to swim here, back when we weren't allowed in the city pools. I thought it was gone. But now I know it isn't. Thank you for reminding us. If your grandfather could see this, he'd be proud. M.A. Julian folded the letter and placed it next to the deed in the lockbox. Some legacies didn't need defending. They just needed remembering. That night, he sat on the dock again, watching the moon ripple on the water. Somewhere across the lake, a porch light flicked off. A door closed. Silence returned. He whispered into the air, not expecting an answer. You were right, Gramp. I didn't let him talk me off my land. The wind stirred. The lake remained still. But something in the water shimmered, as if it, too, remembered.